FIA's final decision on engine rules is making teams unhappy. Aston reveals the extent of its problems, and all the tracks that will be energy demanding have been revealed. Let's get into the latest F1 news. What if I told you that one tiny line buried deep inside a technical document has turned Formula One's entire preseason upside down? We're talking about a gray area so small, so specific, that most people in the paddock didn't even notice it until it was potentially too late. And now, with just days left before a critical deadline, the sport's governing body is holding an emergency vote that could reshape the engine landscape, heading into the most revolutionary season in Formula One history. This is the 2026 compression ratio saga, and it is far more fascinating than anyone is letting on. Let's go back to where this whole thing started, because context is everything here. Formula One is heading into 2026 with completely new power unit regulations, new hybrid systems, new fuel mixtures, new architecture across the board. It is genuinely one of the biggest technical overhauls the sport has seen in over a decade. Every manufacturer has spent years developing their engines around these rules, and the margins between success and failure are razor thin. So when a loophole appears in those regulations, even a small one, the ripple effects can be enormous. Here is the specific issue. The regulations state that compression ratios in these new power units cannot exceed a maximum of 16:1. That is the hard ceiling. But in October of 2025, a specific measurement protocol was added to the rulebook clarifying that this compression ratio would be measured at ambient temperatures. Ambient meaning room temperature, not the extreme heat conditions that an engine actually operates under during a race. And this is where things get interesting. Mercedes and Red Bull powertrains were both reportedly linked to an approach where their engines could technically comply with the 16:1 limit when measured at those cooler ambient temperatures, but potentially exceed that same limit once the engine is running at full operational heat during an actual race weekend. The laws of physics mean that as temperatures change, so does the behavior of the components involved. It is a nuance that, according to reports, the other 4 power unit manufacturers simply did not account for or spot in time. Now let's be crystal clear about something the FIA itself has made absolutely explicit. There has been no allegation of wrongdoing. Nobody is calling this cheating. The FIA's single-seater director Nicolas Tombazis went on record saying there was no cheat, no illegal behavior, and no implication of misconduct on Mercedes' part. What we are actually dealing with here is the classic tension between clever engineering and the original intent of a regulation. Teams find the edge of rules all the time in Formula One. That is part of the game, but when rival manufacturers raise alarm bells loudly enough, the governing body has to respond. And respond they did. After the first Barcelona shakedown, 4 of the 5 power unit manufacturers approached the FIA's power unit advisory committee with proposals to introduce a new measurement protocol, one that would test compression ratios at operational temperatures rather than ambient ones. The voices raising concerns included some of the biggest names in the paddock, and Mercedes found itself standing essentially alone in defending the status quo. So what exactly is the performance gain we are talking about? This is where the story gets genuinely entertaining, because the two sides cannot even agree on the numbers. Toto Wolff, Mercedes team principal, has described the advantage as negligible, suggesting we are talking about somewhere in the range of 2 to 3 horsepower. In a sport where tenths of a second define championships, that sounds almost laughably small. Max Verstappen, however, clearly had a different opinion. After Wolff made his comments, Verstappen publicly suggested the real figure is closer to 20 to 30 horsepower. That is a completely different conversation. That is a potentially race-defining, season-defining advantage. The truth, as always in Formula One, probably lives somewhere in the middle, and the FIA's Tombazis himself suggested the performance gap has been significantly overstated in the public debate. Now here is the procedural piece that makes this genuinely tense. The FIA launched an official electronic vote among the 7 members of the Power Unit Advisory Committee. The deadline for those votes is February the 28th, And here is why that date matters so much. February the 28th is literally one day before the engine homologation cutoff date. Once homologation locks in, manufacturers cannot simply rebuild their entire power unit architecture without facing serious regulatory consequences. The timing of this vote is about as tight as it gets. For the regulation change to pass, a supermajority of 6 votes from the 7 committee members is required. The 4 manufacturers who raised the issue are expected to vote in favor of the new testing protocol. That means to cross the supermajority threshold, both the FIA and the commercial rights holder would also need to support the change. Anything short of that 6-to-1 majority means the proposal fails, and then you are looking at the very real possibility of protests being filed against Mercedes at the opening race in Melbourne. Formula One drama does not get much more intense than that. The proposed change, if it passes, would introduce the new hot temperature compression ratio test starting from August 1st of this year. Any power unit that does not comply with this new standard after that date would be permitted to make adjustments to achieve compliance. So even in the worst-case scenario for Mercedes, there is a structured pathway forward. And what does Toto Wolff himself say about all of this? His position has been remarkably calm given the stakes involved. He has made it clear that Mercedes kept the FIA informed throughout the development process, which is a significant detail because it means this was not something happening in the shadows. He also publicly ruled out any possibility of legal action regardless of how the vote goes. He described the whole situation as a storm in a teacup and said that neither outcome fundamentally changes Mercedes's position heading into the season. What Wolff did push back on, and this is an important philosophical point he raised, is the broader dynamic of 4 manufacturers collectively pressuring the governing body to change a regulation mid-cycle. He made it clear that philosophically he disagrees with that approach, arguing that regulations exist to be interpreted, and that keeping the FIA closely informed is exactly the right way to operate within that framework. But he also acknowledged the practical reality. When 4 of your competitors are pushing hard in one direction and the other option is spending the entire Australian Grand Prix weekend dealing with protests, picking your battles wisely is just good strategy. Senior sources indicate that all 5 manufacturers are actually likely to pass compression ratio testing under either the current rules or the proposed new protocol. If that is true, then the performance stakes, while real, are perhaps not quite the catastrophic scenario some headlines have suggested. And this brings us to what Tom Bazis described so perfectly. Formula One is always going to have these moments. New regulations create new gray areas. Smart engineers find those gray areas, and then the sport has to decide where the line sits between genuine innovation and circumventing the original intent of the rules. The FIA's job is to navigate that line carefully, without stifling creativity, but also without letting regulations become meaningless through clever exploitation. The 2026 season hasn't even started yet, and we already have a governance battle, a potential performance controversy, philosophical disagreements about the nature of the rules themselves, and a vote being held with a one-day margin before a critical deadline. This is Formula One operating at its most chaotic and most fascinating. Whatever the outcome of that e-vote, the compression ratio saga is a perfect preview of just how fiercely competitive this new era is going to be. Every tenth, every horsepower, and apparently every temperature reading is going to matter. Subscribe if you want to stay ahead of every development as we head into what promises to be the most unpredictable Formula One season in recent memory. Formula One is about to go through the biggest shakeup in modern history, and the man who literally built the sport into what it is today just dropped a bombshell warning that nobody in the paddock can afford to ignore. We are talking about Bernie Ecclestone, the former chief of Formula One, coming out and saying something that a lot of fans have quietly been thinking, but nobody with real authority has been willing to say out loud. The 2026 regulations might just be turning Formula One into something it was never supposed to be. Stay with me here because by the end of this video, you are going to understand exactly what is changing, why some of the biggest names in the sport are genuinely worried, and who might actually come out of this chaos on top. This is one of those moments in F1 history that people will look back on and say, that was the turning point. So let me set the scene for you. Every few years, Formula One introduces new technical regulations, new rules about how the cars can be built, how the engines work, what the power units can and cannot do. It is part of the sport's DNA. But the 2026 changes are not just another tweak to the rule book. This is a fundamental overhaul of what these cars are. And at the center of it all is a massive shift toward battery power and electrical systems. More hybrid, more electric contribution, more complexity baked into every single lap these drivers have to navigate. Now here is where it gets really interesting. Bernie Ecclestone, who shaped Formula One for decades and understands the business and soul of this sport better than almost anyone alive, sat down for an interview and said something that should send a chill down the spine of every F1 fan. He said the new rules do not favor drivers, they favor engineers. And his concern is blunt and direct. Formula One is supposed to be a world championship for drivers, not for the people designing the cars back at the factory. Think about that for a second. When you tune in on a Sunday, what are you actually watching? You are watching Max Verstappen make a split-second decision at 200 miles an hour. You are watching Lewis Hamilton push a car to its absolute limit through a corner that should be physically impossible. You are watching human beings doing something that no computer, no algorithm, no engineer sitting at a desk can replicate. That is the magic. That is what makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. But what Ecclestone is warning about is a world where that magic gets buried under layers of technical complexity, where the outcome of a race weekend is determined more by who has the best software team or who figured out the most efficient way to deploy battery power than by who has the most skilled, most brave, most instinctive racing driver behind the wheel. And Ecclestone did not stop there. He went further and said something that should have every team principal losing sleep right now. He warned that Formula One could lose fans over this. Not immediately, not overnight, but gradually, as casual viewers struggle to connect with what they are watching. Because here is the truth about sports entertainment. People do not fall in love with engineering solutions. They fall in love with characters. They fall in love with rivalries. They fall in love with the human drama of someone pushing beyond their limits and either triumphing spectacularly or failing in the most dramatic fashion imaginable. Now let us talk about who is most vocal about their concerns, because Ecclestone is not alone. Max Verstappen, the four-time world champion, the man who has dominated Formula One in a way that has not been seen since Michael Schumacher's era, has been pretty transparent about how he feels about these new rules. He has described them as his least favorite set of regulations in his entire F1 career. And he has even suggested, more than once, that regulations heading in this direction might speed up his decision to walk away from the sport entirely. Now, whether that is posturing or a genuine warning is something we will have to wait and see. But when the reigning world champion is saying publicly that these rules might push him toward retirement, that is not something you can just brush aside. That is a signal that the sport needs to take seriously. Here is the other massive piece of this puzzle. Ecclestone specifically called out Mercedes as the team best positioned to benefit from the 2026 changes. And if you know your F1 history, you know exactly why that name carries so much weight in this conversation. Every time Formula One has introduced a major engine regulation change in recent memory, Mercedes has shown up absolutely prepared and left everyone else scrambling to catch up. They did it in 2014 when the hybrid era began, and they dominated for years afterward. The question everyone is asking right now is whether history is about to repeat itself. George Russell is the man who would potentially lead that charge, and Ecclestone acknowledged his talent while also pointing out that Russell will need to show that ruthless competitive instinct across an entire season. Not just in flashes, but consistently, week after week, in the way that separates champions from nearly men. And then there is Lewis Hamilton, now at Ferrari, chasing what would be an unprecedented 8th world championship. Ecclestone made a comment about Hamilton that felt almost poetic. He said he sees Lewis not giving up, not willing to stop before achieving his ultimate goal. And he said that if Hamilton wins the championship this year, it would be a great story. He is absolutely right about that. A Hamilton championship in a Ferrari In a year of complete upheaval, in a season where nothing from previous years guarantees anything, would be one of the greatest sporting stories in a generation. Ferrari, by the way, is another team that Ecclestone hopes will have a say in this year's championship. And there is a fascinating element to this because Ferrari in Melbourne has been tipped as a potential frontrunner, though there are genuine questions about whether early season performance will translate across a full year as teams develop and adapt to the new technical landscape. Then you have the fascinating subplot with Audi making their full Formula One debut this season. Ecclestone actually expressed genuine confidence in their prospects, and he had particularly warm words for Gabriel Bortoleto, the young Brazilian driver who he believes has what it takes to become a world champion one day. He framed Bortoleto as someone who will push experienced teammate Nico Hülkenberg, which is a fascinating dynamic in itself because Hülkenberg is no pushover and has proven his pace many times throughout his career. The chaos that Ecclestone predicts at the start of this season is not just drama for drama's sake. It is genuinely rooted in the reality of what happens when you change this much this fast. Every team is essentially starting from scratch in terms of understanding how to extract performance from these new cars. The power unit architecture is different, the aerodynamic regulations are different, the deployment strategies are different. Nobody has a definitive playbook, nobody has a guaranteed answer. What that means for the first few races is uncertainty on a scale that Formula One has not seen in years. And honestly, from a pure entertainment standpoint, that is both incredibly exciting and genuinely frightening. Exciting because we might see teams and drivers who were nowhere last season suddenly competitive. Frightening because the sport risks looking confused and chaotic in a way that could alienate new fans who are just discovering Formula One through the drive to survive generation. The real tension here is a fundamental philosophical question about what Formula One actually is. Is it the pinnacle of engineering excellence, where the smartest technical minds in the world compete to build the fastest machine? Or is it the ultimate test of human driving skill, where the bravest, most talented athletes push themselves and their machines past every boundary? The answer, throughout the sport's history, has always been both. But the balance matters. And right now, that balance is being questioned by one of the most authoritative voices the sport has ever had. Ecclestone's warning deserves to be taken seriously, not because he is always right about everything, but because his concern reflects something that millions of fans feel when they watch a race and wonder whether the guy who crossed the line first deserved it because of what he did in the cockpit, or because his team solved a software puzzle that the others missed. The 2026 season is about to begin. The chaos is coming. The question is whether Formula One will emerge from it stronger, more exciting, and more human, or whether it will take a step toward becoming something that even its most loyal fans struggle to recognize. Drop your predictions in the comments below. Who do you think wins the championship this year? And do you agree with Ecclestone that the sport is drifting away from its roots? Subscribe if you want to follow every twist and turn of what is shaping up to be the most unpredictable Formula One season in decades. Formula One racing is about to change in ways that most fans haven't even begun to wrap their heads around. And I'm not talking about new liveries or driver lineups. I'm talking about something that could fundamentally alter how races are won and lost, how drivers approach every single corner, and which circuits suddenly become absolute nightmares for engineers and teams alike. The 2026 season is bringing a massive shift in how these cars generate and use power. And today, we're breaking down exactly which circuits are going to cause the biggest headaches under the new rules. Before we get into the circuits, you need to understand what's actually changing. For the first time in Formula One history, the power split between the combustion engine and the electrical system is going 50-50. That means half the car's performance is coming from a battery. That battery needs to be charged. And the way you charge it in a racing car is through something called regeneration, basically. Harvesting energy every time you brake. The harder you brake, the more you recover. The faster you were going before you hit the brakes, the better. So circuits with long straights feeding into tight, slow corners are a battery's best friend. And circuits with fast-flowing sections where drivers barely touch the brakes? Those are what teams are now calling harvest-poor environments. Let's talk about which tracks fall into that nightmare category. First up, and this one hurts because it opens the entire season, is Melbourne. Albert Park is beautiful to watch and drivers love the feel of it, but from a regeneration standpoint, it is genuinely problematic. Look at the layout. Apart from turn 1, there are almost no places where a driver comes hammering down a long straight and has to stand on the brakes. Most of the circuit is made up of medium to high-speed corners, the kind where you barely lift and certainly aren't generating the heavy braking events needed to charge the battery. There are small windows at turn 3 and toward the end of the lap, but these are slim pickings. Starting the season here means teams are going straight into the deep end. Then we head to Japan. Suzuka is considered one of the greatest circuits on the planet by virtually every driver who's ever turned a wheel on it. The S's, the sweeping high-speed sections, the flow of the whole lap is just incredible. But all those things that make it amazing for drivers are exactly what make it terrible for battery regeneration. The S's themselves require minimal braking. The famous 130R corner is taken flat in modern machinery. The spoon curve offers very little. You basically have Degner, the hairpin, and the casino triangle as your main braking events. And that is nowhere near enough to keep a 50% electric power unit happy over a race distance. Saudi Arabia sits in the same category for similar reasons. Jeddah is all about flowing at high speed between barriers. It looks terrifying from the onboard cameras, and that's because these drivers are carrying enormous speeds through corners that would be flat-out scary on any other circuit. The turn 1 braking zone is solid for regeneration, and the final corner gives you another good opportunity. But in between those 2 points, you're essentially praying the battery holds together while dealing with a lap that demands constant, high-speed commitment. Now Canada. Montreal is slightly better than some of the others on this list, but it still makes the cut because of its mix of long straights and medium-speed corners that don't offer enough deceleration. The hairpin is a lifesaver, and the chicane at the end of the lap helps, but there are stretches where drivers will be putting serious energy back into the battery and then immediately spending it again down one of those straights. Belgium is fascinating because it's the longest circuit on the calendar, and that length actually becomes part of the problem. Spa-Francorchamps has always been loved for its epic high-speed sections. The run through Eau Rouge and up Rétillon is something that defines what a racing circuit should feel like. But with a 50-50 power split, that long, flat-out blast from turn 1 through the Kemmel Straight is going to drain electrical reserves before drivers have even reached the second sector. Sector 3 at Spa is also predominantly high speed, so you're looking at 2/3 of a very long lap, where regeneration opportunities are limited. Now, if you're a Formula 1 fan and you heard teams were worried about certain circuits, I'd bet money that Monza was the first place you thought of. And you'd be absolutely right. The Temple of Speed earns that nickname because it is basically a series of long straights connected by chicanes that only exist to stop the cars from going too fast. The racing at Monza is spectacular for fans and historically iconic, but for a battery trying to keep itself alive over 53 laps, it is close to worst-case scenario. For qualifying, a team might be able to get away with going full send on one lap with minimal charge, but in a race, every single stint is going to require extraordinary management of when and where electrical power gets deployed. Baku might actually be the most extreme case on this list. The main straight in Azerbaijan stretches over 2 kilometers. 2 kilometers of flat-out acceleration followed by a sharp braking zone, a short chute, then another straight, then more straights in the middle portion of the lap. The city circuit layout means that when you're not braking hard, you're blasting through narrow streets at full throttle. The battery will be desperately trying to recover energy in the brief moments where braking happens, and if it can't accumulate enough, drivers are going to arrive at the end of that main straight with diminished electrical power right at the moment they need it most for acceleration. That is a sitting duck scenario in a race environment. Finally, Las Vegas rounds out this list. The strip circuit shares DNA with Baku in the worst possible way for battery management. The main straight is nearly 2 kilometers of flat-out running. After that, drivers go through a weave section before another long straight. The lap starts with a braking zone into turn 1, which helps, and there are opportunities in the middle sector around turns 5 through 9. but the overall balance of the circuit tilts towards sustained high-speed running rather than the hard-braking events that keep batteries healthy. So what does all of this actually mean for racing? It means strategy is about to become even more complex. It means drivers won't just be managing tires and fuel loads. They'll be having conversations mid-race with engineers about battery state, about when to lift slightly on a straight to allow regeneration to catch up, about sacrificing lap time now to have power available later. It potentially changes how overtaking works, because a driver who has managed their battery better through a stint might have a significant straight-line advantage in the final laps when a rival's electrical system is running low. The circuits that were already difficult from a racing perspective might become even more chaotic, and the ones that reward clever energy management could produce entirely new strategic patterns that we've never seen before in Formula One. Some teams will master this faster than others. Some drivers will adapt their style better than their teammates. And some circuits are going to expose weaknesses in cars that looked competitive elsewhere. The 2026 season is not just a regulation change. It's a reset of how we think about performance, strategy, and even which tracks suit which cars. The harvest-poor circuits we've talked about today are where championships could genuinely be won or lost. If your team gets to Melbourne and hasn't solved the battery regeneration puzzle, you're already playing catch-up in a season where everyone else is figuring it out at the same time. If you want to stay across everything happening in the lead-up to the 2026 season, make sure you subscribe, because we are going to be covering every development as it happens. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Which circuit on this list do you think is going to cause the most drama? I want to know what you think. What if I told you that one of Formula One's most ambitious projects is already in serious trouble before a single championship point has been scored this season? Aston Martin walked into 2026 with arguably the most exciting roster in the paddock. A legendary designer in Adrian Newey, a brand new partnership with Honda, and sky-high expectations. But right now, they are staring down the barrel of what could be one of the most difficult seasons any team has faced in recent memory. And the numbers do not lie. Let's start with the story that is genuinely shocking when you break it down. Pre-season testing is supposed to be where teams iron out the kinks, learn their car, and build the foundation for the year ahead. For most teams, it went broadly to plan. Mercedes, Ferrari, McLaren, Haas. They were racking up lap after lap, dialing in setups, stress testing power units, getting their drivers comfortable. Meanwhile, Aston Martin barely made it to the track. In Barcelona, they showed up, with only about a day and a half of testing left. Let that sink in. While other teams were already hundreds of laps deep, Aston Martin was still trying to get the car working enough to leave the garage. Then they arrived in Bahrain, and the story got worse. Reliability issues just kept piling up, one after another, throughout the entire session. By the time the 3 pre-season tests were done, Aston Martin had completed just 400 laps total. That sounds like a lot until you compare it to everyone else. Williams, who skipped Barcelona entirely, still managed 790 laps. Let me say that again. Williams did not even attend the first test, and they still nearly doubled Aston Martin's total. Cadillac, a completely brand new Formula One team, a team that has never competed in this sport before at this level, still managed to complete 750 laps. And then you look at the top teams, Mercedes, Ferrari, McLaren, and Haas. And Aston Martin only accumulated roughly a third of the laps those squads managed. When you zoom out even further and look at it from a power unit mileage perspective, Aston Martin's 400 laps represent less than 10% of what Mercedes' engine customers clocked collectively. Less than 10%. That is a staggering deficit. So what on earth is going on? To understand that, you need to understand just how much Aston Martin changed heading into this season. This is not a team that simply updated a few aero pieces over the winter. This is a team that essentially rebuilt itself from the inside out. For 17 years, Aston Martin, in its various previous forms, used Mercedes power. Mercedes engines, Mercedes gearboxes, the whole package. This year, they switched to Honda. That alone is a massive undertaking. Integrating a completely different power unit architecture into a car is an enormous challenge, touching everything from cooling layouts to how the suspension connects to the rear of the car. But they did not stop there, because they are no longer using Mercedes gearbox technology. They had to build their own gearbox for the first time. And as if that was not enough, they also developed entirely new rear suspension, new electronic systems, and new partnerships across multiple components. Team principal Mike Krack has been refreshingly honest about the situation. He stood in front of cameras and said plainly that Aston Martin is not at the level of the others right now. He acknowledged that every lap they did not complete during testing is a lap of learning they will never get back, and their competitors are not going to stand still waiting for them to catch up. What makes Krack's assessment interesting is that he is not pointing the finger at any single culprit. You might expect the story to be simple, that the Honda power unit had early teething problems, and that caused everything else to fall apart. And while Honda's reliability was certainly part of the picture, Krack is saying the issues are spread across all areas of the car. New electronics causing headaches, the new gearbox throwing up problems, the new suspension, the new partnerships across the board. When everything is new at the same time, isolating and fixing problems becomes exponentially harder because you cannot be certain where one issue ends and another begins. Pedro de la Rosa, speaking on behalf of the team, put it bluntly when he said simply that they are slow and not where they want to be. He did not make excuses. He acknowledged that looking back and asking what if is easy, but it does not change the reality. There are theories floating around about what compounded the situation, whether earlier preparation would have helped, whether the timeline of Adrian Newey joining the team affected things, whether Honda's own development path played a role. But De La Rosa's message was clear. They know what is wrong, and now they need to fix it. And that is actually where a small sliver of hope exists within this whole story. Krack used the phrase teething problems more than once, and he seemed to mean it genuinely rather than as damage control spin. When you change everything simultaneously, you expect chaos at the start. You just hope the chaos is temporary. Honda is a manufacturer with an extraordinary Formula One pedigree. They powered Red Bull to championships. Their return to the sport as a full works partner with Aston Martin was one of the most anticipated stories of the season. The expectation is that once the initial integration problems are resolved, the power unit itself will be competitive. But here is the tension that makes this so compelling to watch. Formula One seasons do not wait. Every race where Aston Martin is struggling with fundamentals while other teams are optimizing performance is a race they cannot get back. The gap in understanding between Aston Martin and the leading teams is not just about lap time right now. It is about the depth of data, the setup knowledge, the confidence in the car's behavior under different conditions. All of that comes from laps, and Aston Martin is desperately short. Adrian Newey's presence at the team generates enormous excitement because his design philosophy has produced some of the most dominant cars in the sport's history. But even a genius needs time and a stable, functioning platform to work with. Right now, Aston Martin is still in the phase of just getting the wheels to turn consistently, which is not the environment where you can translate theoretical design brilliance into race-winning machinery. The season has started and the clock is ticking. Aston Martin's challenge is not just building a fast car anymore. It is catching up to where they should already be, while simultaneously trying to develop in real time, all while their rivals are already several steps ahead. The question hanging over every race in the coming weeks is whether Krack's teething problems theory holds true, whether this is a painful but temporary storm, or whether the scale of simultaneous changes has created problems that will take the majority of the season to unravel. One thing is absolutely certain. The Aston Martin story in 2026 is going to be one of the most closely watched narratives in Formula One this year. Whether it becomes a remarkable comeback story or a cautionary tale about the dangers of changing too much too fast, we are all going to find out together. If you are as fascinated by this situation as I am, drop a comment below telling me whether you think Aston Martin can turn it around before the season is too far gone. And make sure you are subscribed because this story is only getting started. Formula One in 2026 is already making headlines before a single race has even been run. And the drama isn't coming from crashes or controversial overtakes. It's coming from the cars themselves. The drivers are talking. The FIA is listening. And right now, the biggest question in motorsport is whether the most ambitious regulation overhaul in Formula One history is actually going to work. Let's break down exactly what's happening, why Max Verstappen is at the center of it, and what the FIA is actually planning to do about it. So here's the thing, when you change Formula One cars, you usually tweak a few things. Maybe the aerodynamic package shifts slightly or the fuel limit gets adjusted. But what happened heading into 2026 is something entirely different. Formula One essentially rebuilt itself from the ground up. Brand new chassis regulations, brand new power unit regulations, and most significantly, a completely new approach to how power is actually generated and used in these cars. We're talking about a roughly 50-50 split between traditional internal combustion engine power and electrical power. That is a seismic shift. For context, electrical energy generation in these cars has nearly tripled compared to what we had last season. Tripled. The way a driver manages a lap is fundamentally different now, and that's where the controversy starts. Now, if you've been following F1 news at all, you've probably heard Max Verstappen's name attached to some pretty strong language about these cars. The four-time world champion hasn't exactly been quiet about his feelings. He compared driving the new machinery to Formula E on steroids, which, depending on how you feel about Formula E, is either a mild critique or a devastating one. But Verstappen didn't stop there. He essentially said he'd prefer to ditch the battery component altogether and just have a proper Formula One engine doing all the work, leaving the all-electric stuff to Formula E where it belongs. And look, you can agree or disagree with that take, but you can't dismiss it. This is the best driver on the planet right now, a man who has demonstrated an almost supernatural ability to extract performance from a racing car. And he's telling you the new driving experience doesn't sit right with him. That matters. But here's where it gets really interesting because the FIA's response to this criticism tells us a lot about how complex the situation actually is. Nicolas Tombazis, who serves as the FIA's single-seater director, sat down with journalists in Bahrain and addressed Verstappen's comments directly. His response was measured but honest, and it revealed something important. The FIA isn't dismissing the feedback. They're genuinely open to making adjustments. But Tombazis was also clear that the sport doesn't run on driver preferences alone. Formula One has stakeholders at every level, from the fans watching at home to the massive automobile manufacturers who have committed billions of dollars to being part of this project. Mercedes, Ferrari, Audi, Cadillac. These organizations didn't sign up to a 50-50 power split by accident. These regulations were designed years in advance specifically to attract manufacturers who wanted to see electrification become a meaningful part of the sport's identity. You can't just rip that out because one driver, however talented, isn't enjoying the experience. That said, there's nuance here that's worth paying attention to. Tombazis acknowledged that the concerns drivers were raising last summer and into autumn were significantly more alarming than what teams and drivers are saying now after preseason testing in Barcelona and Bahrain. People were spending time in simulators and expressing serious reservations. Now, with actual track time under their belts, the feedback has improved considerably. That's a good sign. But it doesn't mean everything is perfect. One of the genuine technical concerns that hasn't gone away involves specific circuits. Not every track gives you equal opportunity to recharge the battery while you're driving. Places like Melbourne's Albert Park, Jeddah, and Monza are high-speed layouts where you're rarely lifting off or braking in ways that generate meaningful energy recovery. At those tracks, managing your electrical deployment becomes a much more demanding and potentially limiting challenge. This is a real problem, not just a driver complaint, and it's one the FIA acknowledges still needs addressing. So what happens next? Tombazis was transparent about the fact that adjustments could be coming, specifically around how energy is deployed in the cars. The direction of travel seems to be targeted tweaks rather than wholesale changes. He described the situation as being around 90% of the way to a reasonable place, which means there's still roughly 10% of work left to do. He was also clear that any changes would need to go through proper governance channels, So nothing is happening overnight. What I find genuinely fascinating about this whole story is the tension at its heart. Formula One is a sport built on pure performance, on the idea that the fastest possible car should win. But it's also a global platform for automotive technology, and increasingly, that technology is electric. The manufacturers who fund this sport want to demonstrate relevant technology to consumers who are increasingly buying electric vehicles. The regulations were designed to serve that dual purpose. But if the driving experience suffers, if the racing becomes a fuel and energy management exercise rather than a flat-out battle of talent, then you risk losing the audience that makes Formula One worth sponsoring in the first place. Verstappen isn't wrong that the energy management demands are changing the nature of driving. Tombazis isn't wrong that the sport needs its manufacturers. Both things are true simultaneously, and finding the balance between them is genuinely difficult. The fact that the FIA is engaging openly with teams, manufacturers, and drivers, rather than stubbornly defending every decision, is encouraging. The sport learned some hard lessons earlier this decade about what happens when you ignore the product on track. There's also a broader competitive picture here that nobody should overlook. Fernando Alonso has already warned that the 2026 season could throw up some serious surprises in terms of the pecking order. Ferrari's Fred Vasseur has cautioned against reading too much into Melbourne results as a sign of how the whole season will play out. Alex Albon has suggested there's still significant lap time being left on the table because teams and drivers are still learning the cars. This is a genuinely open championship heading into its opening race in a way Formula One hasn't been in years. That unpredictability is exciting, even if the path to get here has been bumpy. The bottom line is this: the 2026 regulations represent the most ambitious transformation Formula One has ever attempted. The challenges are real, the driver feedback is mixed, and the FIA is navigating a balancing act between pure performance and technological relevance. Max Verstappen's criticism is a symptom of genuine growing pains, not a reason to panic. But the FIA needs to get those final adjustments right, because the difference between these cars being remembered as a bold evolution of the sport and being remembered as a cautionary tale could come down to a handful of technical tweaks made in the coming months. This season is going to be absolutely fascinating to watch unfold, and we are going to be covering every twist and turn right here. If you want to stay ahead of the story, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. The 2026 era is just getting started, and trust me, the drama is only going to get bigger from here.